So, like I said, we're going to start on chapter 16. Where did we leave off? Do y'all remember? What was happening in 15?
Oh, Melchizedek, and then
Sacrifice.
Abraham shared part of his wealth with him. Was that 14?
Yeah, no, that was part of it. And then that was 14, but it's leading into 15. We're going to talk about that too. 15 was the sacrifice, the cutting of the 3 animals. 2 of them weren't cut. And then God walking through the covenant of the animals. Not Abraham, nor Abram at the time. Okay, so God was making a covenant with Abram, showing him that it's all him doing it, has nothing to do with Abram. Okay, which is good, because that means Abram can't mess it up. Because we talked last time, if you do a covenant with somebody and you can't fulfill it, typically it leads to death. So that God is showing him that, hey, this is all me. As you know, I want you to obey, but this is my covenant to you. And is this ongoing, or has it already been fulfilled? Still going. And what is that covenant? You remember?
It's a king's covenant, right? He made Abraham a king. That's the one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's coming up. He said, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless you. You're going to have a son. You're going to be, multitude of nations. And what's interesting as we go through this covenant with Abraham, every time God makes this covenant, it changes just a little bit. Doesn't change the covenant, but what God says says to him during this covenant changes a little bit each time. And we're going to cover that a little bit today, which I think is kind of interesting.
I think we read in Hebrews, there's none greater than God himself. So he did the covenant under his own name.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's a covenant to Abraham, but this is God's covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, so now we're getting into chapter 16. And what's interesting to me is right before 15, God actually told Abram, look, you are going to have an heir of your own, a child of your own, kind of a thing. So let's make sure we don't forget that, because what comes next and some other things, it gets a little strange here. So let's get into 16. This is the birth of Ishmael. Let's just read it all, 1 through 15. Would somebody like to do that? I know it's 15 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. But she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your servant is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. And the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now with child and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well is called barren. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born.
Okay. Very interesting. So, what questions or thoughts do you have in this section before we get started?
I can take the easy ones.
Okay.
Well, one, I think it's incredible. Like the providential hand of God is like one of the most amazing things to me anyway about God, and how, we screw things up, but everything still works out to God's purposes, right? He doesn't, make us do certain things, right? I mean, he works with our free will. It's just absolutely incredible. But two is the angel of the Lord, you know, who is this guy that's speaking like God?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a question, and I've got an idea on that one.
My observation is, first of all, that I sure wish Abram had waited on the Lord, because what it did is start a family feud here that's still going on today.
Absolutely.
Secondly, is how specifically the prophecy about Ishmael has been fulfilled. It says that he will be like a wild donkey of a man against everyone, and he is. The Arabs can't get along with anybody, not even themselves. The most intense conflict they have is one internal between the Sunnis and the Shiites. They just don't get along with anybody. And then secondly, talks about how he will have a great number of people in his heritage. And last night I checked the internet, and it says that as of today, there are 460 million Arabs.
There's more Arabs
Only 17 million Jews.
than Jews. Yeah. And then, now, do not confuse this with Muslim. That is a faith. This is the Arab nations, okay? So, and even today, though, the Arab nation, the bloodline has been diluted upon all these other different things, but that promise is still kept. And, you know, this angel of the Lord that visits Hagar, we never once see an angel have authority to bless a bloodline. I do believe this is God, the presence of God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is it Jesus? I don't know, but it is God, in, you know, showing us here, you know, and that this is where we get God's presence. We don't ever see him have a physical form. So when we see a physical form, this is why we can say that it is a Christophany, or, you know, a picture of Jesus showing up himself in the Old Testament. Okay, perfectly fine with that. You know, it's pretty cool to see part of the Trinity show up beforehand. Okay, because the whole idea of the Trinity or something like that, you know, is still intact even now in the Old Testament before anything even happens. Okay, so anyway, so let's get back. So it does kind of, it shows us what can happen when we decide to take matters into our own hands without waiting on God. Okay, and like as Dan says, that even though we mess up, it doesn't mess up God's plans. What happens after that may not be what God really wanted, but it still doesn't mess up God's plan. And it's actually bringing his purposes through it, which is mind-blowing. But one thing, and what we're going to see even through this story and through Lot's story, our consequences, what we tend to think are personal, doesn't affect anybody. You have no idea how our sin and our consequences can, you know, affect nations to come. You want to say something? Okay. Because here they made a decision to do something outside the will, and now it is impacting thousands of years later. And then we see also with Lot, you know, at some point, it might be next time we talk, how that is, when they took matters into their own hands. When Ham did what he did, and the curse of Canaan, what that impact is. Do not take lightly the sin and disobedience that we do with God, because you have no clue how that's going to be. If Abram knew and Sarah knew what was going to how this was going to impact nations to come, they probably would have thought differently about their decisions.
God has a determined will or a perfect will, but he also has a permissive will. So, for example, we're told in the New Testament that it's God's will that everyone be saved, but in his permissive will, he allows people to be lost. Same thing here. He had a perfect will, but in his permissive will, he allowed them to disobey him and do something else. So he goes with the punches. And so he can adjust his plans accordingly to see that his perfect will is done.
Yeah. So did this catch God by surprise?
You cannot surprise God.
Exactly. You know, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek because when we get to Abram going into Sodom and Gomorrah, there's the whole debate on, you know, did he really change God's mind and all that? You know, okay, God knew what was going to happen, you know, but God still allows us to interact that way, which is mind blowing. Don't get me wrong, it's hard to understand. But, go ahead.
The strange thing is like Sarah was the one who was laying this blueprint and she blamed on Abraham.
Well, you know what? And we've talked a lot about patterns. That is a pattern.
Yes.
Because who's the first person to do the blame game? Eve. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here we have Sarah
Right.
blaming Abram for what has happened. It's like,
Adam deliberately chose to disobey God, and so did Abraham.
I'm not saying that he wasn't.
Wasn't tricked in
That's
this.
why I remarried. I wanted somebody to blame something on.
Let me know how that goes.
You know, that's a picture though of. It really is. I want to throw the blame back on him for what we started.
Absolutely.
It also shows our weakness, right? We can't forgive our own sins.
No, it's an pride. Hey, I cannot be wrong. So.
Yeah. Well, and like we are people who like to blame. You know, because even when you look at unbelievers, they will blame God for even things. It's like, well, why does he do this? Why does he allow this? Why is this? It's all his fault. He's, you know, I mean, it's just our nature to do. It's a sin nature that we have. Okay. But we also need to understand God's time frame is not our time frame. If God says he's going to do something, he's going to do something. We need to understand that he's outside of time and need to allow him to work when he decides to work. Because it had been 10 years now passed from chapter 15 to now, they still haven't born a son. And they're getting up in age, which is why Sarah later was going to laugh. Because they're at the point where I can't bear children. This is crazy. And so they think that, hey, let's do this. You know, it's a shame to me. This is why Sarai did this. Having children was a big deal to them. And because she couldn't bear children for Abram, she considered that a shame. So she says, look, instead of me doing this, and this was a common practice to offer a maidservant. Okay, so don't look down on her. This is something that they did. Okay, so she offers Hagar to him, and then she gets upset.
Jealous.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, why did she get so mad? It's jealousy. She's the one who offered her.
It seems a little bit like Hagar also.
Now, I was gonna say, it's after she became pregnant, because it was also common that if you bore the son of the man, that you were actually elevated in status. So when that elevation in status happened, that brought Sarai down. And you can understand why she got mad. You know, so there a lot of emotions going on, a lot of, you know, and I love how Abram handled this whole deal. He had every right to keep Hagar as his own, to have the child. But instead, he actually gives, because at that point, she then really, in reality, becomes his. She's no longer Sarai's because of the pregnancy. He then takes Sarai and goes, look, or Hagar, and goes, look, I don't want any issues. You can have her back and do as you please because I want the peace. That's what all this is. This is what's so important to me. You know, and
Wise man.
I mean, what else could he do? You know, it was a very messed up situation. But yeah, well, and that's the other thing is, Abram went along with this. He said, okay, so you can't put all the blame on Sarah. You didn't have to go through with this.
This is like the first episode, the true first episode of Dallas.
Some people in here that may not know. So,
Well, the strange thing is, I mean, she's from Mizraim, like she's an Egyptian. At the same time, she was like honoring the true Yahweh. That's kind of interesting. At the same time, they also gave the Hebrew name Ishmael. I'm surprised, like, you know, it's all like Hebrew name, not really an Arab name, to be honest.
yeah, well, because they are Hebrew, she becomes their part of them. Absolutely. Well, and who gave him the name though? It was God himself, so he's gonna give him that kind of a name versus,
Exactly.
you know,
I think it's amazing how he pronounces this prophecy over the boy. I grew up in an Arab community, big Arab community, and there were quite a few wild donkeys in my family. Myself.
We are recording this, will be careful.
Donkey's gonna lie.
You're not one of them.
Oh, yeah, I know stuff.
Maybe you change the translation to cold.
So,
But it's nice how God doesn't withhold his mercy from people who are not just Jewish or just direct descendants of Abraham. The real big picture of us too. I mean, if you know, think of it from a different perspective, I guess. And you can see what's out there, right? Like we were not born into, I'm not a Jewish person, so I'm not a direct descendant of Abraham, and it shows God's mercy and a path to him in this picture. Me, so.
no, it's good. Well, and also let you know that no matter how much you mess up, God is still there. His mercy and grace, you can't bypass that. Which is, it's a good feeling to know that. Because through this incident, I mean, it ended in disaster. Hagar lost her home. Sarah lost her maid. Abram lost his concubine and eventually his child. And it's those kind of disasters that occur when we try to take matters into our own hands. They never end good. And that's just a good lesson for us to understand. Don't try to play God in your life. You're going to mess it up. God knows it. But even through the disaster, he still will bring good, you know, through it. Okay?
Yeah, I heard a really cool saying that about that. Did it ever occur to you that nothing ever occurred to God? He knows everything that's gonna happen and how it's gonna be done, and he waits in the wings until he knew from the beginning of time that he's gonna do something, and a lot of times he lets you fail so he can say, okay, now I'll show you how I'm gonna fix it.
No,
And
absolutely.
nothing ever occurs to him, he never goes, oh, God, I didn't thought about that.
Yeah, that's never in his vocabulary. But so Hagar runs because Sarah's treating her really bad. Okay, so she runs. Then we have this angel of the Lord appear. And again, I do believe this was God because only God has the authority to bless an entire nation or to multiply and do those things. And it is nice to see that even though she was an Egyptian, that God was going to bless an Egyptian even in this trouble. Okay. And so as we've talked, he says, look, you're going to name her Ishmael. You're going to go back to Sarah. You're going to do what I told you to do. And then I'm going to bless you and you're going to have a great nation. They are going to be a little wild. Okay. And they are, even to this day, we know them. Okay. If you look at them, they are wild people. I'm not trying to be, less hard about it. It's just who they are. And it has been prophesied that. So it is what it is. Get mad at God.
I don't see where it's really a comforting message.
It's not.
Hey, you're gonna give birth to a wild donkey.
Yeah.
The pathway for her out of slavery, it's no longer being a slave. And we hear that, God's mercy all the time is to show us so that we know that there's no one but God and that he is God. And it's just, respectfully, it's another example of God's mercy and pulling us out of slavery.
It's good. And some people even took this comment as it said it may not necessarily even be an insult. It's just letting them know the character and how they're going to live. Because a wild dog, if you ever go to a field where there's donkeys, typically you only see, they're kind of loners. They like being alone. That's how they roam. That's how they do things. And they're pretty violent. Some of them think they're really cute. But let me tell you, donkeys are aggressive and mean if they need to be. They're loners and they wander. That's kind of what they do. That's why farmers put a donkey on their land to protect the animals. Because a donkey, I don't know if you ever saw a video of the donkey killing a
Coyote.
not a coyote, it's even bigger. It was a calf. It was a mountain lion. That donkey was taking it in his mouth and just throwing it up in the air.
That's why ranchers put donkeys in with cattle herds.
Yeah, to protect them. So that's their nature. So God is gonna say, this is who he's gonna be. He's gonna be roaming. He's gonna be alone. That's kind of how they're gonna live. So could be an insult, but it also is just gonna be who the nature of them. Okay. But through this story, don't forget to see God's grace, even through humans' failure. Okay, and that's what I love about all of these Old Testament stories, even New Testament, that I haven't found one person except Jesus that didn't mess up, that God didn't show grace to, that he called, and that's how he treats us. So, you're good. Any questions or any else thoughts on chapter 16?
I think in New Testament, there's a comparison about one born on slave, which is Hagar, and one born out of the free women. So there's a comparison, though it's a different generations, still it applies to modern days. Are we acting like the one born out of the free from all these sins? And thankful to the Lord in every sense, or acting like a wild donkey.
What you gotta do when you're not with God?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's all like a shadow.
It is, absolutely. It's a big picture of things to come. How things are. Okay, so now at this point, just remember, Ishmael was born 12 years after God gave his first promise to Abram. And Abram right now is about 86 years old. Okay. So getting into chapter 17, let's read 1 through 8. Anybody want to read that? This is a small one.
Now, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be called Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you. Kings will come forth for you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generation for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Through the whole chapter?
No, you can just stop there.
Okay.
Okay. So now we have another instance where God is coming to Abram, even at it's been several years even after this. So imagine Abram's kind of thought is, even through all of this, he still doesn't have his own child. I mean, he does, but not through the means of through Sarai. So there's no telling kind of what Abram's feeling at this point. He's old. He's 99 years old now. Okay.
This is the 6th time that God tells him this covenant. 6 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess he felt Abraham needed this encouragement at this point.
Yeah. Well, and the timing of it, and we don't know what even happened in between. Was God silent during this time, and Abram was kind of getting a little frustrated through it? God kind of reassuring him, I'm still here, I'm still doing this. But yeah, this is God. We are thick-headed. Sometimes we need to be told 6 more times because he's going to do it again. Okay.
And here he also introduced himself as El Shaddai.
Yeah. God Almighty. Yeah, then that's an interesting term. Why would he use that? He can do anything under any opposition. He's God Almighty. Even in this scenario where he is old and they are not barren, they have this other issue going on with another child. He goes through all of the obstacles in our lives. I am God Almighty. I can overcome it.
Like he's trying to emphasize the fact that he's going to fulfill his promise.
Absolutely.
This is the first use of that term in the Bible. It's used mainly in the book of Job.
Mm.
Which term, Dr. Reagan?
El Shaddai.
El Shaddai. God Almighty. And then he tells him, he goes, be blameless. He goes, serve me faithfully and live a blameless life. What does that mean? because it's important.
Less problems are less problems. It's not really overcomplicated, is it, right? Like the less you sin, you're blameless before God. There's no reason for punishment, and you're being obedient to him, and you are, he blesses you, so.
It also shows it's less populated. The more you get population in that area, you get blamed a lot.
Well, but it's important to know, this does not mean sinless. Abraham we cannot live sinless. What he's saying is live with integrity. When you live with morals in your life and you uphold those morals, nobody can hold those against you. When you have integrity in your life, no matter the cost, nobody can hold that against you. This is why our political system is in shambles. Okay? Because people hold things over one another and they use them to get things done. And people will do that in our life. Look in the workforce. It happens all the time. So it's not just political, it's in your workforce, or it might be even in your families. Live a blameless life. Have morals, stand up on them.
But it also shows that he can have morals, that he can understand blamelessness, that he doesn't need a 20-page long instruction book, that there's something in his heart, in the heart of man that God created that leads men to do the right thing if they will try. So he's telling him, do that, live according to good moral principles, and somehow you're gonna have the 10 Commandments, but he knows what it is. He knows exactly what God wants him to do.
Yeah, we know where right and wrong comes from. We even know right and wrong before we're even told. When a child lies, they know it. They know that's wrong. How does that happen?
It also shows that it's like, going outside the family, because the previous chapter, Sarai was blaming on Abraham. So in this case, it's like outside the family, he's blameless. Inside the family,
Yeah.
he took the blame.
Absolutely.
So there's truth and consciousness and good and bad that's inherent in all of this. And that's the beautiful thing about the Bible and this Old Testament stories of these people who they're being guided, and sometimes they're doing bad and sometimes good, and they know that.
Yeah, absolutely.
God created it that way.
And through this, then God now comes through, look, this is what's going to happen. He even changes his name. And a name is very big in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament. So don't just look past this. When a name is changed, which you'll see, and Jesus changes Simon's name to Peter, it's a big deal. Because it's almost a promise. It's who you are. It becomes your essence. So instead of being called Abram, which is exalted father, he now is Abraham, father of a multitude. So by changing his name, he's even adding to the covenant, or trying to tell him, look, this is what I'm going to do, so much so that I'm going to change your name to even replicate that. So this is another sign that God was serious about what he was going to do through Abraham by changing his name to it. Okay? So he goes through, changes it. And this time he even adds, he's going to make him very fruitful. Nations and kings will come from him. That's huge. Okay? And this is a perpetual covenant. It's an eternal one. This is not one that will be fulfilled by man by any way. God will fulfill this at some point. And that will be finally fulfilled when it's all said and done. Okay? And he goes, and where you're living currently right now as a foreigner, this will be your descendants' land. He just makes that promise. Now let's go 9 through 14. I really don't like this section, but let's do it. In verse 9, then God said to Abraham, your responsibility is to obey the terms of the covenant. You and all your descendants have this continual responsibility. This is the covenant that you and your descendants must keep. Each male among you must be circumcised. You must cut off the flesh of your foreskin as a sign of the covenant between you and me and you. From generation to generation, every male child must be circumcised on the 8th day after his birth. This applies not only to members of your family, but also to the servants born of your household and the foreign-born servants whom you have purchased. All must be circumcised. Your bodies will bear the mark of my everlasting covenant. Any male who fails to be circumcised will be cut off from the covenant family for breaking the covenant. So he institutes another covenant. Now, this is your part of it. Mine still stands no matter what. But if you want to be a part of what I'm doing, this is your responsibility.
So you think this is an amendment to the original?
I don't know. I've thought of that. I think God, this was, in God's eyes, no. I think in man's eyes, yes. Because God knew this was gonna happen.
Yeah.
But I think because maybe it kind of was put in there because of man's decisions and things along these lines, I'm gonna show you. Look, I want you to take this to heart, what I'm doing here. And when you believe me what I'm gonna do, then this is gonna be your response to me. So it's almost like, I kind of hate putting these two together, but like a baptism, when we come to know faith in Jesus, the very first act of obedience is baptism. This is a sign to show what something that is taken in our heart, that we have accepted this, what Jesus has done for us. This circumcision is kind of that way. You are accepting, and it's a sign of what God has already said he was going to do. Kind of a deal. Okay?
In wills in the law, they call those codicils. It's an addition that doesn't change God's commitment. It's just something a man has to do that God doesn't. Again, he's not telling you, unless you do this, I won't honor my promises. He just says this is something you need to do.
Yeah.
It's an obligation.
And what's very interesting, this act, it requires the shedding of blood. Another theme throughout Scripture. You know, so don't miss out on that aspect of it. Now, I put up here, so we're going to kind of go into science here, because God says specifically you're going to do this on the 8th day. And that is astonishing to me. Why? Because this was before science. This is before we knew anything about how the human body works, all the extra chemicals and how we're made and all this stuff. But God says, look, this is not going to be for you to understand. This is going to be for generations to come to understand. That's going to wow them.
It's awesome that you brought that up, because lately a lot of people have been arguing with us, oh, the times are changing. Well, look at these ancient things that God has given and prescribed, and the Jewish people still do them today. In fact, more than the Jewish people do them today as hygiene. But to me right now, I can see God using some of these things to say, well, times have changed, but our ways should not. And they're still doing it to honor God. And we know they don't have a direct relationship with Jesus Christ right now, which is the main key, but this is something that God could be using to speak to the world that, to us, we overlook it, but it's significant.
Like the 8th day, it's called
Well, it's interesting that this is, I think, what he's getting at. Science has discovered that's when clotting begins.
Yeah, you can't have clotting in the blood without vitamin K. That's one requirement. And today, when a baby is born, they don't wait till the 8th day. They do it pretty early, but most of the time they will actually give them vitamin K to help in the production of getting the blood to clot. The other one that you put in there is prothrombin, and this, your body produces both of these. And I put this chart up here because your body doesn't start producing vitamin K or prothrombin until the 3rd or 4th year or day of the baby's life. It jumps exponentially, and actually at 110% on the 8th day is when prothrombin actually peaks. And vitamin K does actually peak on the 8th day. So at that moment, you have the most your body will ever produce of both of those at the same time. After that, it levels off. So scientifically, God is saying this is the exact day, because if you don't do this, your baby will die. Because it will bleed out.
This reminds me of the fact that in the Middle Ages, the Jews were terribly persecuted because when the Black Plague swept Europe, the Jews had very little of it. So the Europeans said, because of it, they're poisoning our wells, and they started slaughtering Jews right and left. The reason the Jews didn't have the pandemic was because they followed the hygienic laws of the law of Moses.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which were way ahead of their time.
Absolutely. So don't look past the little minor details of when God says to do something. Because what he did back then wasn't necessarily, it was for them, but we were going to really understand it today, and science was gonna be the one to prove God right again.
Not to disagree with all that, but what about females? I mean,
This was just a sign with the males. What do you mean?
well,
Production
you're
level?
gonna die if your blood doesn't clot unless you're circumcised. That wouldn't happen to girls. I'm just wondering if there is some explanation for how they develop the same clotting mechanism.
Yeah, I didn't look into that, so I couldn't tell.
Okay.
Yeah, I would have to assume they're probably both pretty similar to that, since we're all kind of made up in the same chemical fashion.
But you're saying that the male gets the circumcision because that it additionally generates 501K?
Well, God, not because, God says, I want you to do it on this day,
Okay.
specifically because there's more of this in there. Because he didn't even tell them that, he just says, I want you to do it on the 8th day, but this thing is a sign of my covenant to you. That's why. And then he says, but you're gonna do it on the 8th day beyond measures of your own understanding. And just gonna follow me.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, so girls not circumcised, but they don't need to be. So that's the answer to my question.
Oh, yeah, but yeah, yeah, we're not gonna go there. Okay, very interesting though, whenever you look at this stuff. So this, as I said, do not look past when something is very specific as that, stop, pay attention, research it. A lot of times you will see something pretty cool, through the text here. Okay, so not only is it just for Abraham and his descendants, it's for the slaves, it's for anybody in the household. And he says, and if you fail to do this, then you're not gonna be part of it. So God was very, very hard on this, and you're gonna do this or you're gonna be kicked out. Okay, very interesting. Anything else in that section?
Yeah, I just want to say that it's important to know that, and remember that Abraham was declared righteous before this outward sign of circumcision.
Romans 2:25 through 29.
So even in Torah, they mentioned that, because of his faith is called as his righteousness.
Romans 2:25 through 29. It says, the Jewish ceremony of circumcision has value only if you obey God's law. But if you don't obey God's law, you're no better off than an uncircumcised Gentile. And if the Gentiles obey God's law, won't God declare them to be his own people? In fact, uncircumcised Gentiles who keep God's law will condemn you Jews who are circumcised and possess God's law, but don't obey it. It's in it, when we see the comparison, he knew exactly what he was referring to back with Abraham. And the Jews understood that. If you don't read the Old Testament and understand where this was set up and why, you kind of miss a little bit of the understanding of what was being said there.
We also know that Paul didn't he have some of his followers circumcised because he was going to go preach to the Jews.
To Jews,
He wanted them to be able to.
You got to become like the Jews sometimes. Okay. All right, let's move on. 15 through 27. Would somebody like to read that one? Is that too much?
And Elohim said unto Abraham, as for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah, her name. And I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. Yah will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto Elohim, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. And Elohim said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son. Indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant with his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee, behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he behead, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. You want me to read 20?
Yeah, go ahead and finish the chapter.
27. And he left off talking with them, and Elohim went up from Abraham. And Abraham took Ishmael, his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were brought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day as Elohim had said unto him. And Abraham was 90 years old, and nine when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son, and all the men of his house born in the house and bought with money of the stranger were circumcised with him.
Thank you.
It's strange, like even the Muslims, they actually circumcise on their 8/13, if they wanted to follow Ishmael.
Yeah, absolutely, because the thing is, is when we were in Israel, when we went over to the Jordan area, our guide was Muslim. And it was very interesting to me, all the site, he was getting excited of even showing us like the site where Jesus was baptized across the Jordan. And I'm like, how is it that, and I went and said, why do you, like, how are you, as a Muslim, why is this exciting to you? He's like, we believe in Jesus. He goes, and our ancestry goes all the way back to Abraham. And it's just kind of like, that's right. Because, as an Arab, that is who they go back to. That's their father, of their nation. And so don't forget that they all are part of this whole deal, because they are all under that Abraham umbrella. Okay, yeah, absolutely. So now we get God to Sarai, and now he changes her name. Sarai means princess. Sarah means noble woman. And now God confirms even the covenant to her. So God's getting pretty serious here. He's like, look, guys, I know y'all messed up. All good. I'm going to bless her. I'm going to bless Ishmael over here. This is my covenant to you. This is going to happen. I promise you. Trust in me. And then he even says, by this time next year, you will be with child. Now he's even getting even finer detail of when that covenant is going to be fulfilled. And that'll come here in a little bit later. But so he changes her name. Abraham bows down. He laughs. Don't miss over that. Because what does Isaac mean?
Laughter.
Yeah. So what's interesting to me is he named Isaac after his parents' attitude, not his own character of what's coming up. So, and what you're going to see later, Sarah laughs too. So it's not just Isaac.
Okay, we don't follow those things in these days. When the babies were born, they have a sagging skin. And you don't name them as sagging skin.
Yeah. Nice. But let's also don't forget how, what Abraham was going through. He was looking at this whole idea through fleshly eyes, not spiritual. We tend to do the same thing, so don't get upset with him. Don't look at him any wrong, because we tend to look at life with flesh eyes. It's hard for us to see spiritual things. Okay? And then he talks about Ishmael and his heirs. And I find this very interesting, because when you read on later, Ishmael has 12 sons, which is also very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, because who else has 12 sons?
Judah.
Jacob. Through the line of Abraham will have 12 sons, which is the 12 tribes. Ishmael has 12 tribes. 12 sons, I should say. Very interesting. Okay. And then he also shares what's going to happen to Abraham, what he's going to do with Isaac. It's all going to be fulfilled through him. Okay. He's going to bless him and all through that. Now, like I said, now he gives Abraham a date, and you're finally going to have your son. At that point, then Abraham says, okay, Lord, I believe you. All the men, come with me. That had been a very stressful day. Okay? Because it's a lot easier when you're a child versus when you're an adult. but that showed his commitment to God at that point. He says, look, God, I believe you. And this is what happens, and we're gonna do this. So then he goes through the process.
I feel sorry for the women having to handle all those whiny men.
That's funny. Any other thoughts or questions on this chapter?
Just the setting up this rivalry that's gonna last for decades, it's gonna last for thousands of years. And when it's 12 and 12 and names and all this, you see that he is intentionally creating something that he's gonna use for his glory all the way to the end of time. It's just amazing.
Absolutely. And he's not even done setting it up. There's more coming.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get to 18. I think we can finish 18. We'll see. Maybe not. Let me just read 1 through 15 in chapter 18. The Lord appeared again to Abraham near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. One day, Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the hottest part of the day. He looked up and noticed 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he ran to meet them and welcomed them, bowing low to the ground. My Lord, he said, if it pleases you, stop here for a while. Rest in the shade of this tree while water is brought to wash your feet. And since you've honored your servant with this visit, let me prepare some food to refresh you before you continue on your journey. All right, they said, do as you have said. So Abraham ran back to the tent and said to Sarah, hurry, get 3 large measures of your best flour, knead it into dough, and bake some bread. Then Abraham ran out of the herd and chose a tender calf and gave it to his servant, who quickly prepared it. When the food was ready, Abraham took some yogurt and milk, and he roasted the meat, and he served it to the men. Abraham waited on them in the shade of the tree. Where is Sarah, your wife? The visitor asked. She's inside the tent, Abraham replied. Then one of them said, I will return to you about this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was listening to this conversation from the tent. Abraham and Sarah were both very old by this time, and Sarah was long past the age of having children. So she laughed silently to herself and said, how could a worn-out woman like me enjoy such pleasure, especially when my master, my husband, is also so old? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Why did she say, can an old woman like me have a baby? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she denied it, saying, I didn't laugh. But the Lord said, no, you did laugh. Okay. Any thoughts on this little section here?
What's amazing is the Lord,
You always lose when you argue with the Lord.
Yeah. Don't argue.
No, shall not lie for the Lord.
she didn't do this out loud. It wasn't like she laughed. It was totally silent to her, and he goes, hey, that's very good.
Yeah. You can't, your thoughts are even non-private. Keep that in your mind.
I
Okay?
sure would like to know how some of these adventures would have turned out if they had chosen to not lie or to do the right thing. It's very exciting when they do obey God.
And then
Same
see-
mind as well, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest question is, who are these 3?
I think one of them should be definitely Christ himself, because in later verses, he will call, I will send, it's a Trinity, he'll be Trinity there. He will send rain, I think like, Adonai from the heaven will send rain. So that verse is like, there's a plurality being used, the verb that's being used in the later sentences were plural.
Yeah, right.
And also, one other thing is, Sarai called Abraham as a Lord, Adon.
That was not command, so our wives don't need to do that. That's funny. So he says one of the men was the Lord.
Could have been Moses and Elijah. Could have been the Trinity. I mean, there's a lot of different, could be angels.
But Moses
These are the same 2 angels that go into Sodom.
Yeah, they are. And so if you read ahead, these other 2 are angels. They are messengers. Okay, so they are accompanying. I see this as a picture of God coming down, whether it's Christ or not. God is down. 2 angels are accompanying him because they're coming to him with a purpose. They're coming to see Abraham and Sarai and make another proclamation covenant, what, you know, just revisiting the same thing. But then they're also coming down because judgment is coming. And we'll get to that in another chapter here. But yeah, so this is God and two angels, in my opinion. Okay? Because it's the same covenant that God has said, been telling him what's happening. So I have to believe it's the same God who's been talking to him this entire time. Okay?
And we believe it's Jesus, right?
That's debated, but yes. So anytime you see God in like a human form, many people tend to believe that's Jesus, and you know, kind of incarnate.
And Jesus himself said in the New Testament that, I mean, you know, your father Abraham was delighted to see me, and these are the moments of delight.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Abraham bowed at the
Yeah.
feet, and he didn't say, don't
Don't-
do that.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting that both Abraham and Lot and the citizens of Sodom recognized that these beings were not normal.
Yeah.
There was something about them, right? It doesn't tell us, but.
No, absolutely. And if you've been in my class long enough, you've heard me say this, is kind of what Vicky's responding to. Anytime you see an angel coming to God, to people, or God coming to somebody, when someone bows down to them, because they will come in such a form that will just scare the living daylights out of them, and it'll cause them to bow. If that person says, "Get up, do not bow to me," that is an angel, because they know that that is not who you bow to.
Yeah.
They don't want that. That's not for them to receive. If that person stays bowed, and that whoever the deity is does not say to get up, that is a good sign that is God himself in some form. So that's a good way that you can tell if it's an angel or God.
And also, the Lord will say, remove your sandals because they'll place
You're on
that
holy
is
ground. Yeah.
So that is another indicator, and always God blesses, you know, when he is God, when he appears as a God, he blesses him. When he, you know, if it's a messenger like Malak, like, you know, that becomes like, you know, it's an angel.
Absolutely. Now, I want to start in the first couple of verses because he says he came to this oak at Mamre. This is the same oak where God gave his covenant to him. And it is believed, if you actually pulled up this oak, they actually believe, they actually know that oak right now because it is this ancient oak tree that's basically dead now. The tree itself is dead, the roots are not, but they have it supported by beams. And they will say that this is Abraham's oak, or that's what, if you do a search, you'll see a picture of it. I don't know. Trees have lives. You know, okay, so be it.
And that reminds me when I visited the monastery at Mount Sinai. They take us through and show us the library and all, and he says, here's the most important thing. This is the burning bush. And they got a bush there.
Just take all that stuff for granted, you know?
Attractive points for tourism.
It is. You know, and it was funny to me when I was in Israel, and nothing against any of these places, so please take this lightheartedly, you know, to some degree. But when you're in Israel, I was asking a guy, it's like, how do they know this was the spot that Jesus gave the Beatitudes, or this spot that he goes, well, it's because, I forget what her name was, one of the queens.
The mother,
Yeah.
Constantine.
Constantine's mother said, well, this is the spot where this happened, well, they built a church. This is the spot where this happened, they built a church. I mean, so take it for granted, they're not spots to be worshipped.
You know, when you go into Bethlehem, you have to get an Arab guide. You won't let an Israeli guide go in.
Right.
Arab guides are terrible. And we were down there in the place where Jesus was supposed to be born, and he says, okay, the wise men stood over here, and Mary and Joseph were over here, and the baby was here. He looked around and says, anybody interested in buying a necklace?
Oh my God, there you go. Business straight to the point.
Did he say hee-haw?
That's why it's on me.
What's important here to know is how Abraham responded.
Yeah.
Abraham knew who this was. He was common with God, and he showed respect to God and showed him hospitality. He's saying, let me wash your feet. Let me cook for you. Let's do this. And so they ate. So some people have a really hard time believing this was God and the angels because they ate. I'm sorry, God can do whatever God wants to do.
Psalm 23, we're gonna be.
Okay, so if you read that, just remember, God
After
can
the
do it.
resurrection. Yeah, I'm hungry.
The Bible refers to the food of angels.
Yeah, but
I know.
it was just funny.
Yeah, I know.
Um,
You complain or else after that.
So this is what, when I was talking earlier about the different times Abraham, or God told Abraham this covenant, this is very interesting to me, because in 12:2, God told Abraham that he's going to make him into a great nation, many children. Stops. 15:4, Abraham was promised an heir, a natural born son. So now you get specific, this is how it's going to happen, but I'm not going to tell you when. Then he says, Abraham in 17:16-21, Abraham was assured that Sarah would give him a son. So now he even says, okay, you're going to get messed up, but through your wife, this is what's going to happen. Okay. And then in 18, he says, the time has come now, the promise will be for this. So every time he was getting a little more specific about how this covenant was going to take place. And now he's getting to points that the time has come now. Get ready. So, it's kind of interesting to seeing how God will not always tell you everything all at once. We just need to trust God. And we need to take that faith to move when he tells us to move, to do when he tells us to do, regardless of how we think. Okay? He has that right. He's God. Okay? So don't get mad if he doesn't give you all the details. That's how he operates. That, by our actions, that is a representation of our faith in him.
So say, he doesn't give us details because he wants us to live by faith.
Absolutely. It wouldn't be faith if he gave us all the details and what he's going to do through it. Okay? So just remember that. That is his way. So anyway, so he goes through and does all that. And let me see here. I don't want to get into this next section here. Well, for next week, we're going to leave a little early today. We're going to be talking about, or not next week. I will be out next week. I'm traveling to New Mexico. I don't know if we'll be talking about this next week. I'll talk to whoever's going to teach on this. Sodom and Gomorrah, very interesting story. Okay.
Widely, since the sexual perversion movement says that God poured his wrath out on Sodom and Gomorrah, not because of homosexuality, but because the people were inhospitable.
Inhospitable. Yeah, I put that in my notes when I was preparing this. It's very odd of how we have taken, and even Christian churches will say that. So
Hey, Methodist?
there are several. Okay. But the interaction between Abraham and God and the angels with Lot, pay attention to all this because this is very interesting. Go through chapter 19 at least, and pay attention to what happens with Lot. And look for the pattern that happens with Lot. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. It's very interesting. But we'll hit that then next time. Any questions on anything that we've covered today? I know it's taking us forever to go through the Torah, but these several chapters in Genesis are so key because it sets everything up. Okay. It will go faster, I promise, but it's good stuff. It's good stuff for us to learn. Nothing else? Okay.
So I'm just thinking like when Jesus said like, no one has seen the Lord, for no one can see the Lord. So all these people are saying Elohim and it's Yahweh, like it's still, I mean, that shows the.
But they haven't seen the face of God the Father.
Yeah, so here they're
Which
seeing.
we will.
You know, eventually,
Says in Revelation, you'll
Yeah.
see God's face.
that's a final promise we all have. But in this case, they're seeing Yahweh, Yahweh was speaking to Moses. So who's that? And the God is like more than one, it's a plurality there.
Yeah. Just so you know, moving forward until the building is done, we may have to leave out here a little early than normal because Mike Mossberg's class is coming in here because we've lost the cafe. Because it's now under construction.
Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah. So just FYI.
That'll be my third class in here this morning.
Save and keep Seymour. Any prayer requests?